We're back for the second part of the Linus Tech Tips Linux Gaming Challenge, and even though I feel like the first part had some production issues, overall it was a very good introduction and went over a lot of the issues that, a lot of new Linux users are going to face. Especially if they're doing it, jumping straight in, not doing any pre-research. And today we're going to be going over setting up Linux game streaming. Throughout this video, I'll be offering commentary and also solutions to some of the problems that Linus and Luke do face. Now, when I offer these solutions, I'm not saying that Linus and Luke should have known about these solutions. That's perfectly understandable, they don't. A lot of these are, you have to know a lot about Linux. But if anyone is having these same issues, I want to make sure that you guys can actually address them rather than sitting around with stuff just being broken. There is a checklist of things that need to be addressed, and I'll let Linus tell you what they are.
We'll need comms to chat and collaborate with our fellow creators, and software that's capable of capturing our gameplay, audio, and face cams.
Basically, OBS.
And obviously, we'll need the aforementioned audio interfaces and cameras both working.
We both use Elgato key lights, which we've always controlled using Windows software.
I don't use Elgato key lights, so I can't really comment on what the support of these actually is like, but from stuff they do later in the video, it seems like you're better off just using the mobile app.
Software, so we'll both need to find a workaround for that.
And no points will be awarded for having an ugly or bad sounding stream. It's got to look every bit as legit from a viewer perspective as it did on Windows.
There's no point, streaming if it's going to be an absolute mess. So the first problem that Linus had is when trying to install OBS.
I tried to apt-get OBS, the industry standard for desktop.
Which, if it was still on an Ubuntu-based distro, or Debian-based, would work if the package was called OBS Studio.
Capture and streaming in the terminal, only to discover that Manjaro, the Linux distribution that I'm using, doesn't come with apt because apt is for managing packages on Debian and related OSs.
Now, I can totally get why any new Linux user would make this mistake, especially if they're jumping between different distros. It makes sense why you don't know what the package manager is on that system. Anyone who's making fun of Linus for making this mistake needs to step back a bit and just think about what they're saying. Even someone very experienced with Linux can absolutely make this mistake.
Making life more difficult, the message that comes up when you try to execute the command doesn't say, hey, you should probably be using Pacman, you dunce.
What it says is command not found or something along those lines. I feel like for anything that's a bit more, user-friendly in its design, Manjaro, PopOS, Ubuntu, things like that, if you use a package manager not designed for that system, like, you try to call apt from Manjaro, or you try to call Pacman from PopOS, it should probably tell you, hey, this is not the package manager we use, this is the one we use instead. I feel like that would be a, basic but fairly useful improvement these things could make. But then Linus says this.
It tries to install some kind of dependency for apt, then just quietly fails and prompts you to do the same thing again when you try to use it.
Now, anybody who's tried to run sudo apt-get install OBS on like Manjaro or something like that, that doesn't happen. I literally have no idea what Linus did to make that happen. I was talking to guys on my Discord. Nobody could replicate this behavior because what it actually does is this. apt-get command not found. I don't know how Linus did this. If someone knows, please let me know in the comment section down below. But the weirdness doesn't stop there.
Speaking of which, I had a panic moment when I checked OBS compatibility and found out that it is actually unsupported in Arch, by the way, and its derivatives.
Is not what it said. That is not what it said at all. It said, very, very clearly, even circled it, unofficial. It is not supported by the developers. So if something goes wrong, don't contact the developers about there being a problem on Arch Linux. It is unofficially supported by the community. It is not unsupported. It's just the developers themselves don't do the support. And then, surprising no one ever, this happened.
But the good news is that upon launch, I was immediately relieved to find that it works exactly as expected. With some exceptions.
It's almost like it's in the standard repos, and if it's in the standard repos, it's probably going to work. Now, Linus goes on a bit of a rant about Nvidia, and look, anyone using Linux, they know Nvidia is janky. Can we just talk about something different, though? What is this font? I don't know if Linus is, like, unironically using this font on his system, or if this is here just to, like, troll the viewers, because this is one of the ugliest fonts I have ever seen. Don't actually use this, please. Just use anything else. Linus certainly understands why the Linux software is a mess, though.
It's just obvious that the Linux software has never gotten the kind of TLC from the UX team that the Windows software does.
That isn't just a thing with Nvidia, that's actually a fairly common trend. If there is, like, you know, a Linux configuration tool that's officially supported, a lot of the time it's gonna be like, it looks like it's from 6-7 years in the past, or it's just, you know, missing basic features that you would expect to be there. But a lot of the time, especially with things like mice, they just don't exist. Luke, on the other hand, installs OBS perfectly fine. It's available in the Mint software manager, but it doesn't work perfectly.
Once installed, though, we noticed something. Window capture on Linux can be a little problematic. We couldn't seem to get it working at all at the start. I had an option for it, but it didn't work, and Linus didn't even have that. But a few days later, I tried it again for a different project, and it worked just fine. I checked in with...
I have had the exact same problem happen before. I'm not 100% sure on the cause. What it seems to be, though, is if you do, like, you know, a video driver update or an audio server update, things in OBS sometimes just don't work perfectly. Generally, if you do, like, a system restart, you're going to be fine. And then Linus runs into the problem that faces every single Linux user.
The bigger issue for me ended up being the software that just doesn't exist. There are third-party tools, for example, that allow key remapping. Keyboarding Master is evidently a popular one.
Now, anyone watching this, have you ever heard of Keyboarding Master? I haven't. I literally have no idea what this software is. I had not heard of it until Linus mentioned it. Maybe it's popular. Maybe in, like, my little bubble, it just doesn't exist. But I've never used this. And judging by the fact that it hasn't been updated in about, what, 5 years? Yeah, about 5 years for the code, it doesn't look like it's that popular. But keyboard remapping isn't the only thing you might want to do.
But if your peripherals have a manufacturer-provided tool that is used to reconfigure RGB lighting, or the lift-off distance of your mouse, or the sensitivity steps of your DPI button, then get ready to install Windows in a virtual machine, pass those devices through, configure them, and then hand them back over to Linux.
That is a solution. Like, I'll give Linus that. It is a solution. If the device, like, you know, a mouse, has onboard memory. But in a lot of cases, that's very, very over-engineered. So Linus uses a Logitech mouse. I believe it's like a newer version of the G305. Logitech mice, Corsair mice, and a lot, but not all Razer mice do have community-driven software. So libratbag for Logitech, CKB Next for Corsair, and Razer CFG for Razer. Things outside of that, though, yeah, you probably want to go down, like, the Windows VM route. Some things outside of Logitech are supported in libratbag, but a lot aren't. But Linus also owns the worst possible mixer board you could have if you want to be a Linux user, the GoXLR.
The bad news about it is that, as far as I can tell, TC Helicon has given exactly zero thought to Linux whatsoever.
People have been asking for support for quite a while, like since the device came out. And look, they've said nothing. I don't think they've even responded to the community request, let alone saying, no, we're not gonna do it.
But wait, there's a solution. All I have to do is follow these simple instructions to download
This project, GoXLR on Linux, it does function. You can use the device, but half of it still does not work. This isn't really a solution. It's more of like, hey, I don't have anything else. Let my audio just work at all.
Random script off GitHub and run it, with no indication given whatsoever for how exactly to run a script.
Yep. This is the problem with a lot of GitHub projects. So a lot of projects assume that you are a developer, and that's entirely fair because, you know, GitHub is a developer platform. But I feel like projects could do a better job at explaining, like, hey, how do I actually install this? Saying download and run it, like, that's great. But if I'm new, how do I run it? Like, what do I do? Luckily, there's like, tons of resources on how to actually run a script, but this is one of those annoyances you're going to come across if you're approaching Linux from a less developer perspective, I guess.
Even the process of downloading it was unintuitive. And I know GitHub is for developers and not for end users, but it's really hard to hide behind that shield when it took me less than 2 days to run into a situation where I had to use it.
To be fair, the GoXLR is a very specialized device, but you are going to run into problems where you will have to use it. One thing I think GitHub could very well do to improve the user experience of their site, if you're not downloading it through Git, just add like download buttons to all of the things here. Like, it wouldn't be that difficult. If you click on a file, it actually has like a download button in the file. Adding it outside of the file as well wouldn't be a big change.
I mean, at that point, if GitHub is only for developers, then desktop Linux is only for developers.
I think that is a fair assessment to make. Not because Linux has to be like that. I think, especially in cases like the GoXLR, mice getting support for these, it's not that Linux is inherently made for developers. A lot of these problems are caused by the fact that companies don't release, configuration tools, don't release drivers for all of these devices. So end users are sort of forced to go and use them, even if, on Windows, on macOS even, you would never need to touch GitHub.
Anyway, I found a guide on how to run a script. I'm grateful for that, but I'm frustrated by the condescending tone. I mean, my assumption that a file with a .sh extension would behave as I would expect it to and launch in some kind of script running application doesn't seem that unreasonable.
Except it is, because Windows actually does the exact same thing. So with PowerShell scripts, if you double click on one of those, it's not actually going to go and open it up, in PowerShell. It's going to open it up in a text editor. If you want to run it as a script on Windows, you right click on it and click run as a script. This is the exact same behavior that happens on Windows. If it's a problem on Linux, it's a problem there as well. What I think Linus is doing, as he explains in just a bit, is expecting them to work like program files.
Newsflash, random contributor, you can also change a file extension in Windows, and it will attempt to launch in the default program for that file type. It actually serves exactly the same fundamental purpose, hinting at the contents of the file.
Yes, and the default program to open up a script is a text editor. This can be changed if you want to open them up in a shell, but it's also incredibly dangerous to let that happen.
The only difference is that these hints for the user are also used as hints for the operating system.
Linus is absolutely on point with this though. So on Linux, typically you're not going to be, basing what program to open it with based on the extension. We're going to be using the metadata in that file. This does lead to some confusion where you have things that are like, .psd, let's just say for a Photoshop file, but it's not going to try to open it up in GIMP because the metadata of that file is saying, hey, this is actually like music or something like that. It can lead to a lot of confusion when you are moving between the systems. I don't think either of them is worse than the other because file extensions have their own problem where you can mask things like exe files as, innocuous HTML, for example. Moving on from Linus though,
The most notable issue I had was that my audio devices were just kind of screwy in OBS. My voice came across very unnaturally deep, and it sounded like my mic input.
I've had the exact same problem before.
My voice just feels deep right now. I don't know if I've got something lodged or what.
And
I don't know if you guys heard that little, audio click that happened. That wasn't a problem with my recording. That actually happened in Luke's stream. So I had never known what this problem was. I've run into this problem a bunch of times before. What someone replying to this video said was this is likely due to Pulse Audio and OBS and your mixer board sampling at different rates. So Luke shows his settings in just a moment, and his sampling rate was set to 44.1 kilohertz. It's very likely his mixer board, though, was running at 48 kilohertz. This difference in sampling rate can lead to the tone being dropped.
Feeling out of options, I just restarted OBS, and
that's what I do every time, and it just works.
yeah, that solved pretty much everything, which was kind of frustrating because I've heard time and time again that you don't have to turn things off and on again to get them working in Linux, but hey, maybe that's just because I'm not really great at Linux yet. Maybe.
There's certainly that. Like, yeah, if you get better at Linux, you absolutely can do this. But I really wish that people would stop spreading around this idea that it's, it's something you can do on Linux. Yes, you can do it. Yes, you can reload your kernel, your init system, your graphics drivers, your audio server, every piece of software on your system. You absolutely can do it. And in a production system that you don't want to go offline, in a situation like that, it's perfectly good to try to do that. But for a home user, 99% of the time, it's just quicker to do a restart. And back over to Linus.
Pamac is a program with a graphical user interface that functions similarly to the Pacman package manager that you operate in the terminal. At least it does once you find the hidden button in Pamac to search snap, flatpak, and Arch user repository entries.
Wrong, because Pacman does not search those things. So out of the box, Pamac works the same way as Pacman. If you add those extra things, you're adding extra functionality over the top of Pacman. But they're certainly great additions to have.
It's basically like the Pop Shop from Pop OS, except it didn't try to brick my system the first time I used it.
There is that. Well, technically it could, assuming the Manjaro team broke something, but at least in this case, it didn't do that. If you want to go see my video on why this actually happened and how it was fixed, check it out in the description down below and up there on the screen if I remember to link it.
The only really difficult thing was choosing the right package to install for Discord. There's regular Discord, and then there's Canary Discord, whatever that is.
Both of those are Discord. Canary is one of those weird developer terms. It's like nightly, it's like beta. Basically what Canary means is it is the bleeding edge package. Canary in the coal mine. If something breaks, you're the first one to die. It's one of those things that could very easily be, addressed by having, a better description in Pamac saying, hey, look, Canary means this is the bleeding edge version. It didn't say that. I don't know why it's really blurry. Basically, it just says the exact same thing. If it's just like, this is the developer build, this is the cutting edge build, it would be very obvious what they actually are.
But other than that, it works really well, and my first voice call to Luke went completely without a hitch. Or it would have if I'd known that it was starting. Unfortunately, I actually still have not figured out how to get desktop notifications working.
Linus, you want to know why your desktop notifications are not working? You're in streamer mode. Streamer mode disables notifications. This happens on Windows as well. It's so you don't get Discord pings while you're streaming. It automatically opens when you open OBS. Once again, Luke got Discord installed, but there were still some problems.
That being said, there was certain missing features. Screen sharing across Slack, Teams, and Discord are kind of sketchy at best. They feel less stable, or they're even missing some features here and there.
Yeah, screen sharing's a bit weird on Linux. So if you're using Xorg, you can screen share individual application windows, and you can screen share your entire desktop. But because of the way that Xorg works, a lot of applications don't actually let you screen share individual desktops. It will just let you screen share your entire desktop. So if you have 3 monitors, it's all 3 monitors. Wayland addresses this issue, but then Wayland has the issue of desktop portals and Pipewire and all of that fun stuff, which if your distro doesn't set up for you, is a bit annoying to set up.
If I download a file in Slack and then try to click the Open Containing Folder button, just nothing happens.
What's happening here, it happened on my system as well because I'm too lazy to fix it, is Mint probably doesn't have a default file manager set up. So because Slack doesn't have a file manager built in, it's just I don't know what to do, I'm just gonna wait here. On my system, if I download something in, say, Firefox, Chrome, anything like that, and I click Open Containing Folder, it actually opens the containing folder inside of the browser. It seems very weird that Mint wouldn't have that set up, though, so it might be that Luke is running the Flatpak, and the Flatpak doesn't have its permissions set up properly, and is just ignoring his default file manager.
Unfortunately for my camera, however, Canon EOS Utilities doesn't work on Linux. I'd been using that software on Windows for quite a while now to get a live feed from my Canon 70D over USB to my computer. So
over USB, There is a solution on Linux. I didn't know about this until a couple of hours ago, and it only works with very specific cameras. I believe it does work with the camera he's using, though. So through a program called... Yeah, it does. Okay, literally the same camera. Through a program called Gphoto 2 and like some other terminal utilities, you can like make this weird video chain and make it work. My setup, I'm using a EOS camera as well. I've just got a cam link 4K. I plug it into my camera, get HDMI video out, and it just works. But if you don't own a cam link, the cam link is a very expensive device just to get something working that you're already doing for free. And Luke did know he could fix this.
I do have an AVIO 4K capture card, which does work on Linux, but I don't have the micro HDMI cable that it would need to connect to my camera. I could pick one up.
Basically, the cause of Luke's problem here is that he doesn't want to go for a drive down to the store. Like, he could fix this in, like, 5 minutes, but he just doesn't want to. If you want a capture card that'll work nicely on Linux, what you need to look for is a UVC device. This is a USB video device class. Don't ask me why there is not a D in the name. The UVC drivers on Linux work basically perfectly. Like, there are some fiddly things every so often, but things will run. My live game, well, my Ava Media Live Gamer Portable 2 Plus, whatever the dumb name is, worked perfectly, but things like, say, the Elgato HD60S, they don't work, but then the HD60S Plus actually does use these UVC drivers.
Almost everything was missing at least one feature, and some, I'd say most notably OBS and Teams, were just buggy, requiring restarts for simple settings.
I don't use Teams, but I've heard that it's a little bit flaky. As for OBS has certainly gotten a lot better on Linux. Even when I started using Linux, OBS was missing a lot of basic features, like the OBS browser, for example, to do like stream alerts. That needed a plugin. Now it's actually there, but the problem that we have with OBS on Linux is different distros can package it in different ways, and different features can actually be disabled. So for example, if you're using the basic version on Arch Linux, things like the browser are disabled, things like docs are disabled, but then you use the version on Ubuntu and they're all enabled. This is one of the weird things that happens with OBS. It can seem like it's inconsistent between distros, but that's not because of the program itself, it's because of the distro maintainers. And unsurprisingly, Linus has a fairly negative take.
But a Linux gaming PC, it requires all of that crap and then another mountain of crap on top of it. Like, when something doesn't work, you can tell yourself, well, I never wanted to use that functionality, or I never wanted to play that game anyway. But honestly, it just comes across as sour grapes. It is not that easy to use.
I think it depends on how you're approaching Linux. If you're approaching Linux the way that Linus and Luke have been, where you're approaching it, trying to get everything to work, you're going to be disappointed every step of the way, because every step of the way, there's going to be hurdles. There's going to be software that doesn't work. There's going to be software that isn't available. Sometimes you might have to spend extra time configuring it. But if you approach it from the perspective of, I want to use Linux, and I expect none of this to work. If it works, that's cool. That's when you'll be surprised by how it goes. But I think the assessment Linus has here is certainly fair. I don't know if I'm going to cover part 3 at this point. We'll see what happens when it actually comes out. Judging by what's been happening, something exciting is probably going to happen, but we'll see what happens then. Let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think about the way that Linus and Luke have actually been addressing this? Do you think that it's fair, the assessment Linus has made? Do you think it's fair, the assessment Luke has made? Or do you think that, it's unfair to Linux, that you should be expecting everything to just work? I would certainly love to know. So if you like this video and you want to support the channel and become one of these amazing people over here, go check out my Patreon subscribers only Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. I've got a podcast called Tech Over Tea available basically anywhere. I've got a gaming channel called Brodie Robertson Plays, where I live stream twice a week, upload about 5 YouTube shorts, and this channel is also available over on Odyssey. That's going to be it for me, and I'm out.